of football. Never a dull moment on this show. Working through a big guest lineup today. Dan Wetzel, heavy hitter, Yahoo Sports columnist. Will Brinson, we're going to have him from CBS Sports, senior NFL writer. One of my favorite college football guys. We're going to talk Alabama football. The first of many, I'm sure, with Cecil Hurt. Tuscaloosa News. Been covering Alabama since 1980 freaking 2. And then another guy who's been around forever, a contemporary of mine from Kansas City, Dennis Dodd, is going to be joining us as well to talk the national college football angle. We'll talk SEC as well with Cecil, as the SEC's finally starting to get going conference-wise. Big game last Saturday, Florida, Kentucky. We now know about Kentucky. They're dead. Florida, not sold, lost their quarterback. But we'll talk a lot about the Alabama-South Carolina game, how crappy the Alabama defense looked, how badly Will Muschamp, the South Carolina coach, coached that game. Horrific job. And Alabama might not be as good defensively as people think, and we might be seeing a changing of the guard in college football. I think it could be coming as far as LSU taking over in that SEC West division for the Alabama Crimson Tide when it comes to perennial contender in the college football playoff. Something tells me, though, Cecil Hurst of the Tuscaloosa News is going to push back on that idea. So we're going to be talking NFL. We're going to be talking college football. And I want to lead off by talking, before we get to Will Brinson, hopefully of CBS Sports, I want to talk a little bit about what's been going on over the last 24 hours. Of course, we had the Monday Night Football game and a disastrous series of events over the last week for the New York Jets, losing their top two quarterbacks, the latter in gruesome fashion yesterday. If you saw the game, blown out by the Browns, who, by the way, didn't look that good themselves. Who the hell is going to win that division? It's looking more and more like the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson could be in the driver's seat there. Jackson, of course, playing with the Ravens against the Chiefs in the big game of the day, early game on Sunday. Looking forward to that. That could tell us a lot, particularly about where the Ravens are and that division. They could be in the driver's seat if they can pull off an upset over the Chiefs and Pat Mahomes. But Browns didn't look that great. OBJ looked great. The watch looked great. The gold visor, that looked great for a while until they pulled him off the field and swapped that out for a clear visor. But Odell Beckham Jr., I think, confirms why we talk so much about him, why we are always seemingly gossiping about the guy. We can't get enough of the guy. I was just thinking, watching that game yesterday, and then all the subsequent coverage of OBJ, the one-handed catch you probably caught if you're watching the game. But I was thinking, of all NFL players right now out there, right, OBJ is the most popular player by far amongst kids. And I was thinking about last night's game and how his legend only grew for the kids, and the kids with the jerseys, the kids, taking up his mannerisms, the kids trying the one-hand catch after last night. And of course, the media only feeds into that. And I was just, oh my God, to be a parent right now, if you've already got an OBJ fan, wow. You're going to be dealing with a lot of hero worship there in more ways than one, in the mannerisms, in how they might play on their flag football team, tackle football team, what they have on their walls in their bedroom, whatever it is. And then you're always growing the new fans, right? The kids. But that's what I was thinking about when I was watching him yesterday with the long run after catch, and then with a one-hand grab. So that's cool. But the Browns didn't look that great. The offense struggled. It chugged, it lugged, it fell all over itself, stepped all over itself. Baker Mayfield still not there yet. And Greg Williams, actually defensive coordinator for the Jets, did not do that bad of a job yesterday, even though, of course, Odell Beckham personally got over on him. So we're not necessarily going to be talking about that. I wanted to touch on it for a second. Of course, Daniel Jones is now the new starting quarterback for the New York Giants. And overreaction Tuesday, everybody's saying, well, the Eli era is finally over. Well, last I checked, they're not releasing him. So calm the F down, pump the brakes. Daniel Jones is your quarterback for now. We'll see what happens. The one thing that the Giants have taught us with Eli Manning is they are undyingly loyal to him. Even though Eli is 121 and 121 is in his entire career, and he has been a dumpster fire since his last Super Bowl appearance in terms of wins and losses for the New York Giants. So Daniel Jones comes in. We'll see if Dave Gettleman, the GM, is a genius. Everybody was killing him. Jones looked okay in the exhibition. We'll see what happens. But my big story for today, as far as the NFL is concerned here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, as we get set to be joined perhaps by Will Brinson of CBS Sports. Dan Wetzel will talk NFL with him coming up, is the Miami Dolphins situation, that trade, sending Minkah Fitzpatrick, top defensive back, cornerback, a guy who is an exceptional player, 11th pick overall in the draft last year, to the Pittsburgh Steelers in exchange for a first-round pick. There were some pick swaps as well in that deal. Interesting trade, weird trade, I think, from the Steelers' perspective. It makes you wonder where they're coming from on that. Are they all in on Mason Rudolph? Sounds like they're still all in on Big Ben. You would think he's going to have that year-ending surgery. But what does this mean for the Steelers? People have all kinds of different theories about it, but what I want to zero in on, particularly here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, as we lead things off on a Tuesday, is what the Dolphins are doing. And I talked about it a little bit yesterday, but it is now underlined in bright line ink what the Dolphins are doing. And obviously, they're stripping the team. They're building up this huge cache of first-round picks. We see that, but is this something that the league should be concerned about? I was watching Pro Football Talk Live with Mike Florio earlier today, and he mentioned in passing, and I've got a message into Mike today about it. Should the league step in as to what the Dolphins are doing to that franchise? And you wonder when you hear that from a guy who's a lawyer like Mike Florio, exactly what would that entail? And of course, someone who is sophisticated like Mike Florio, it's weird that he would say something like that, because what's the league going to do? Take over the team? There's less than no chance that's going to happen. First of all, the idea that you take over that franchise or the league steps in, I mean, that's what that really means, right? Well, you're not going to do that. If the league is what we're told it is, you have 32 separate entities, 32 separate businesses, 32 separate teams that are trying to win. They're doing whatever they can to win. That's the pretense of the whole league. So to step in and, I don't know, put some league person in charge of the club, you can't do that. You're infringing on the integrity of the league. So that's something I want to talk to Will Brinson of CBS Sports here in a second, as he's going to be joining us on the fan line coming up. Later, we'll have Dan Wetzel of Yahoo Sports, Cecil Hurd of the Tuscaloosa News, and then also Dennis Dodd of also CBS. Hey, Will, how you doing today?
Brooks, what's going on, buddy? Hope you're doing well.
I appreciate you coming on, and you are a guy who wins at Twitter. Again, I mentioned this to Eric Ewald yesterday, but I hate you because you're so much better at Twitter than I am.
Well, you know what? If God didn't give me much, but he gave me the ability to be sarcastic at 140 characters. So it worked out. I landed on Earth at the right time.
So real briefly, can you take us through your background for people who don't know, because it's really been a fascinating rise following your career?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting story. I went to school for a long time, didn't do very well in school, and that's neither here nor there. But as I was wrapping up college, I was working for my dad at his law firm and started writing online. I originally started, writing it, wrote for Sports by Brooks, did some stuff with a bunch of other smaller sites, wrote for Matthew Berry's before he got hired by ESPN, the talented MrRoto.com, and eventually landed with Jimmy Mottram at Fan House, and that segued into CBS. I don't know. It's weird. I'm not sure how it happened either. It's like the reverse of that Talking Heads song. Like, this is not my beautiful life. It's like, I don't know how I got here, but it worked out all right,
So what role do you think Twitter had in your career and your rise, if any?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think a lot. I mean, when, as the internet was sort of, in its nascent stage and was growing in terms of like blogs and all of that. I mean, it helped to be able to have a voice on social media and to be able to cultivate a following of sorts, not outside of just writing articles and writing stories and all of that. So certainly a huge help. And look, there's a bunch of people out there who literally just tweeted. They didn't, and I mean, I'm not saying it in a pejorative fashion. Like, they literally just tweeted and had Twitter accounts that were good and creative and clever and funny, and they would end up, getting jobs, and that's pretty incredible. Like, it's a sarcastic meritocracy, I guess.
We're talking to Will Brinson of CBS Sports, and Will, what kind of impact do you think Twitter has had on your writing, if any? I mean, to me personally, it's made me, I think, a better writer in terms of trying to be more concise and coherent in your thoughts in a direct way.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Because I mean, and now you can thread tweets and all of that, and you can change it, and you can take a snapshot of a big thing you wrote out on Notepad and toss it up there, or whatever. I mean, but for sure, like, you have to learn how to. I think I've changed the way that I phrase certain things. I think I've changed the way that I write things to make them more concise and more clear. I think I've, eliminate certain words. Like, the word "that" is a word that everybody uses in like writing all the time. I say, like, as I'm talking all the time. I wish I could get rid of that. But, that is a word that gets used a ton in writing, and it's entirely unnecessary most of the time. And if you can sort of curtail that a little bit when you're trying to write for a character count. And I think, so in that sense, yeah, it helps.
Will Brinson also hosts the Pick Six Pod, which
is wearing my Pick Six podcast shirt.
There it is, man. And it's a daily NFL podcast. He's the senior NFL writer. So as I look down your Twitter account, I mean, it's fascinating how Twitter really, I think, and let's look at particularly the Miami Dolphins Twitter account right now, how Twitter itself is injecting itself theoretically into a news cycle, because I think, as we anticipate, we're both kind of on the same page. I think when we're trying to anticipate news, you're talking about the Miami Dolphins Twitter account right now. On your account, at least you're mentioning it, and I see that, and I see a possible story there because of the reaction of the fans.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that it became quickly. It's almost bizarre, Brooks. How it's like, when blogs were first coming around, like, you would never. It was a thing. Like, you would always write about if an athlete had a big tweet or a big post on social media, you always wrote about it, because it was fairly rare for an athlete to step out of a box and do something, not bizarre, but like outside of the norms in terms of what they would do on social media. Now it's like laughable. Like, as soon as somebody does something. Like I mean, half of the stories that we have are fueled by tweets from athletes, and now you have a story where it's like fans reacting to the Dolphins tanking, and like I mean, I'll get lost sometimes on those tweets. Like you go like it's like the Dolphins like, we've traded Minka Fitzpatrick. I'll go read comments and just look at the gifs that fans use for like 15 minutes on those comments and just laugh, because it's like I'm like, and then you store them in the back of your mind, like, I need to save that gif for later. Like, it's like, but like, where do these? I don't know. It's it is fascinating. Yeah,
it's like what you're talking about is there's the shelf life to everything. And so we've gotten over certain things. It's a little bit like the NCAA. We're in a post-NCAA phase. Nobody cares about paying players. There are no ineligible players. There are no NCAA rules. It's a phony pretense to pay players. That's it. That's why the NCAA exists, at least in the context of college football. Basketball, a little bit different. But now when I look at the Dolphins situation, I look at that Twitter account, right? That tells me, at least in my mind, that eventually, I think when you look at the reaction and the accountability of the Dolphins in that situation, how ugly it is. Are they going to lock the account? I mean, what are they going to do? I'm anticipating that we will soon see a day, perhaps when you don't see official team accounts anymore. Is that possible?
No, because I think there's so much branding that goes on with it. And these teams in the NFL, their social media presence, I don't think people really understand necessarily, like, if you don't work for a corporate, I mean, if you work for a corporation, I mean, like, I don't think people understand like how many adults are working for the, like, in some places have less, some places have more, but I mean, there's a lot of jobs that go into this cultivating the social media presence. Maybe Twitter becomes a little less, and it changes from organization to organization, right? Like, it's just like, with Wendy's, the Wendy's account is full of snark and is willing to fire back at people. But yeah, I mean, like the Dolphins account, because they don't win a lot and because they have fans who are, I mean, just I mean, these responses are hilarious. Like,
they are. I mean, right now, but now think of it this way. Think about this scenario. What if that sort of thing, the reaction and the overwhelming tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Dolphins fans, if there are any left out there by now, what if that story becomes a story on CNN? What if it becomes a story on Fox News or MSNBC, and it becomes this colossal embarrassment to the NFL? I mean, I think it's justified because of what the Dolphins are doing. They're killing the integrity of the league. But I think if the social media thing is spotlighted and it's on, the evening news on CBS suddenly, as we get towards week 10, 12, 14, that's really what I mean. It becomes so overwhelmingly embarrassing. And then it shines a spotlight on what's going on here with the Dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, just to play devil's advocate or devil's avocado, if you prefer, for 30 Rock line, I would say
I'm in California, so yeah, we'll go with that.
Absolutely. I would say that, one, like, the Dolphins, in their defense, they have shipped off a ton of assets. Larry Tunsil, former first-round pick, Minkah Fitzpatrick, former first-round pick, but they shipped off two first-round picks who were going to be looking for contracts or were unhappy looking for contracts in the next 3 years. And they've gotten 3 first-round picks back. They're going to have 3 first-round picks this year and 2 first-round picks next year. And that's loaded. Being able to acquire a franchise quarterback, being able to reboot this franchise. And I would also point out that they got a negative 92-point differential, and they got cremated the first 2 weeks of the season. I mean, it was embarrassing. They should be humiliated, but they
cremated. I like that. Yeah. I like the cremated. That's kind of an old guy description.
Right.
I like you going there.
It's what happens when your father-in-law is a funeral director. But they
really?
Yeah. But
that's awesome. That is so cool.
Yeah, he thinks it's hilarious when I tell him that business is he's killing it with his business. He does not think that's funny. But, look, they might have played the best 2 teams in football the first 2 weeks of the season in the Patriots and the Ravens. It's possible that the Patriots and Ravens end up finishing the season like 28-4 in totality, right? They could both be 14-2 teams. Maybe not because they play each other, but I mean, they could be 10 to 13 win teams easily if Lamar Jackson and Tom Brady stay healthy. And as such, I think it's possible that maybe after once we get 8 or 9 weeks into the season, we'll look at the start to the Dolphins year a little bit more differently, because, like, I don't think that they would go play the Jets today and the Jets with Luke Falk would beat them by 40 points. They would be right. It would be a competitive, ugly game that went way under whatever the total was of like 35. They played 2 teams that are very good at football. They're about to play another team, the Dallas Cowboys, that's very good at football.
Very good at football, right?
And
you're very good at Twitter.
But yeah, but I mean, look, I just think that we might look at the Dolphins in a different prism 6 weeks from now than we are currently. Like, if they pull off 2 wins in the next 8 weeks, which I know nobody thinks is possible, but it's the NFL, it happens all the time. Maybe we say, all right, Miami's a bad team, and they're historically bad or whatever, but they have a ton of first-round picks and a chance to rebuild the franchise for once, instead of being this 7-9 orb floating through the maw of mediocrity.
We're talking to Will Brinson. He's a senior writer for CBS Sports, also hosts the Pick Six podcast, daily NFL podcast. And I want to ask you, and this is probably, well, maybe it won't be because you're doing a daily NFL podcast, but when you look at Kaepernick and you look at a team like the Dolphins, or a team like, well, maybe not the Dolphins, but the Jets, and the fact that the Jets aren't signing Colin Kaepernick or not talking about signing him, maybe they will, who knows? But it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Are we getting to the point now where we're reaching this post-Kaepernick phase where we're not going to discuss this anymore? And why is it that you've got Eric Reed on a team, you got Kenny Stills on a team, and you don't have Kaepernick on a team?
Yeah, I mean, I would be pretty surprised if the Jets signed Colin Kaepernick. Mainly because Woody Johnson, who's currently an ambassador for the administration, the presidential administration, his brother is now running the team, right? I think that those two things are probably at odds with one another, and I would be surprised if they signed him.
No politics.
No, it's not even politics. I just think that's a factual thing. Like Woody Johnson is
I'm with you, Will. I'm 100% with you.
Yeah,
I mean, it's part of the story. It's intertwined in the story.
Yeah, I have no interest in politics personally, but
right.
But I also think too, Adam Gase is the coach, right? He had a chance to sign Colin Kaepernick in Miami, and he went with Jay Cutler, and we saw how that worked out for him. So, I mean, it's entirely possible that Jay Cutler comes back before Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick hadn't thrown a pass since 2016 in the NFL. I do think that we are probably at the point where, and we can keep. I mean, not you and I, but we as a whole can keep discussing it whenever somebody, is brought up. But Colin Kaepernick's now 31. Like he's not in his prime anymore. I know he's still in shape. It would be a lightning rod type of situation to bring him in. A lot of NFL teams don't want to do that. I think a lot of the NFL teams probably have scratched him off their list of somebody they would consider signing.
So why isn't Eric Reid a lightning rod?
It's a good question. He didn't start. He didn't start he's not a quarterback, and he didn't start. He wasn't the centralized figure. He was the secondary figure, and he sort of come into Carolina and fit in to the culture there with the Panthers. And David Tepper welcomed him with open arms. Said, look, Cam Newton's missing practice today. Maybe the Panthers could go sign Kaepernick.
Yeah, well, and I think the last thing I want to ask you about Cam Newton, because I think that's a really fascinating story there. But is it possible that maybe the president just doesn't know who Eric Reid and Kenny Stills are? Because to me, the whole Kaepernick thing, even though the president allowed himself a little plausible deniability by saying, oh, it's okay if they sign Kaepernick if he's good enough. To me, that was to throw that out there, kind of a little revisionist history for people writing dissertations in 10 years, right? At universities where, I mean, it's all about Trump's connection to Colin Kaepernick. That's why Kaepernick's not playing. That's why Reid and Stills are playing.
Well, I would also say too, that like, in general, quarterbacks drive storylines, and people don't tend to care about safeties as much as quarterbacks. And so that matters. I mean, the quarterback touches the ball on every single offensive play. It is a position that's been, a mythos about it has been created, whether it's, because of the Roger Staubach Captain America generation, or because of Peyton Manning and how he went about his, the business of being a quarterback. Like there's just a certain way that we tend to perceive a quarterback, whether it's right or wrong. And every quarterback story garners more interest from fans and the media and the world than a non-quarterback story. And that's just sort of kind of how it works most of the time.
Before we let you go, I want to ask you about Cam Newton, because this has been something that's been popping up in my mind about him since the middle of last year. People have just been destroying that guy when clearly his arm fell off last year, right? Mm-hmm. His arm's still probably not right. He's had a couple of surgeries on it now, and now we find out he's aggregated his foot. And I think the problem that we have with him statistically right now, we're bearing his entire career, is that he's not the same running the football. But now come to find out he's got a foot problem. I mean, my sense is everything that's happened to Cam Newton has been injury related. Now you can still condemn him as a football player, but I think there's so many other things going on with him, and he's created that to a certain extent, but it's injuries. That's the issue here.
Oh yeah,
it's cut and dry. But we're not hearing that.
Yeah, Cam's a very polarizing guy. People like to get hot and bothered about Cam Newton. I was tweeting about it on Friday, after the Panthers game. He had a terrible game, but his career's over. His career was over after that game. You saw that stuff. No, yeah. I disagree. I think we saw this in
No, I'm not. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. We saw it in 2017 after he came back from his first shoulder surgery, and he was inaccurate. He was missing all over the place, missing high, and you could tell his ball placement was off, and it gradually got better as the season went on. The problem now is that he's got a foot injury. And that's what Ron Rivera, that's what the Panthers are saying, or actually, I guess NFL media reported it. And I believe, Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic confirmed with, Marty Herney that there's no timetable for his return. I mean, a foot injury for Cam Newton if you're already sapping Cam Newton of his arm strength because of his shoulder surgery, and then you're sapping him from being able to run the ball because of a foot injury, you'd be asking a lot of any quarterback to go out there with a foot injury and a surgically repaired shoulder. The problem is when Cam is inaccurate or Cam doesn't play well, people like to swoop out of the shadows and claim that Cam doesn't have it between the head, and
right.
Cam can't figure out how to be an accurate quarterback. Well, I mean, there's, sort of telling on yourself if you do that, especially when we're talking about a guy coming back from injury. And so, Cam will remain polarizing. It is probably best for the Panthers, and it looks like that's what's happening based on at least the line movement in this game, is that, Cam is likely to miss some time or potentially miss this week. I know that game has been pulled off the board almost universally, and I would expect that we get an update from Ron Rivera maybe in a couple of hours here where he says, we don't think Cam is, we want Cam to take time to get healthy. And so now all of a sudden the NFC South might be short 2 quarterbacks.
Well, I really, really appreciate it, man. I appreciate what you do on Twitter and your podcast and all that stuff. Thanks so much. I hope we can do this again, man. This is great.
Yeah, you got it, Brooks. Take it easy, man. Have a great day.
You too. That's Will Brinson of CBS Sports, senior NFL writer. He's got the Pick Six podcast that I'm retweeting right now. Will Brinson, just one word, on Twitter, and giving us a little insight from his perspective. But he's the kind of guy, and we had it with Eric Ewald yesterday of Yahoo Sports, that we're coming in and we're bringing Eric Edholm of Yahoo Sports. We're coming in and we're bringing you people from Twitter that are aces on Twitter, that are really the people to follow, that somehow are able to churn out entertaining after entertaining tweet. And I hate them for it because I'm not as good at it as they are. But Will Brinson is a guy that actually worked for my website with me for my website. He worked as a writer for SportsbyBrooks. Great guy. And so very, 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 very much worth your time. And so we're going to be talking here to another guy who crushes Twitter, and that's Dan Wetzel. Of course, Dan Wetzel needs no introduction. A best-selling author, a columnist with Yahoo Sports, one of the preeminent voices of college sports. And what I'm going to do is, let's see, I got to plug this in. The great thing about Dan Wetzel is we're going to be able to talk NFL. Well, we can talk anything. This guy went over and covered the Women's World Cup in France. So he does it all, Dan Wetzel. And so we're going to talk primarily pro football, college football. Dan is based in Detroit. So I want to talk about Jim Harbaugh and what he thinks of that Michigan program, because to me, that's a program that is a mystery right now. Nobody's really sure what to think about what's going on with Jim Harbaugh. And I think in the back of my mind, it's starting to creep up. You kind of wonder. I'm not saying he's in trouble by any stretch, but I guess I am saying that. Who knows? So we'll talk to Dan here in a second. And when we were talking to Will Brinson, we were talking about Cam Newton. And that's something that I wanted to emphasize on the show, that, again, a lot of people aren't pointing out. The guy has a foot. The guy has a shoulder. The guy's had 2 surgeries on the shoulder. But you never hear that. You just hear he's not performing. It's funny because if you look at Roethlisberger's, and I'm not saying it's race. That's not what I'm saying here. All right? If you look at a guy like Roethlisberger, and you look at the balls that he was throwing the other day in his first game and a half, he was airmailing those throws. And nobody was talking about how he was missing throws in the way that perhaps they talk about Cam Newton in the way he misses throws. And, there's a lot of things going on with Cam Newton off the field that's a distraction, that's a talking point. And I think people pick up on that. And I think he's unfairly evaluated to a certain extent. So if you go back and look at his injury status and how it affected his play on the field, right? There's not enough of a direct connection being driven by the media there. being noted by the media there, a direct connection as to why he's not performing at a high level. You know, the guy, like I said before, had a severe arm problem last year. Severe. Could not throw the ball deep. And who's to say it's that much better this year? And now, come to find out, the foot injury that he suffered in preseason, wow, it's not that serious. That's why he was wearing a boot when he left the game, right? Ron Rivera is the guy, the coach of the Panthers, to tell you, oh, it's no big deal. Now, I understand they're soft pedaling because of the injury report, and they don't want people teeing off on his foot, per se. But after the game last Sunday, that was the primary thing, last Thursday, I should say, for the Panthers. That was one of the primary things that Cam Newton mentioned after the game. I'm not going to make any excuses, but my shoulder and my foot are hurt, and I'm not going to make any excuses. Well, he just kind of made excuses, right? So, and I've been observing that with him going back to last year. A guy who has been unfairly criticized and treated, and really doesn't have, he literally has no one on his side, or at least I'm not even on his side at all. I'm just pointing out what Will Brinson talked about. These are just facts, inanimate documented facts, in the way that the media, piles on athletes. And that's kind of what I do. That's what I've made my bones on in my career, is the ability to see these things as they're happening from 30,000 feet. Another example is what we talked about with the Miami Dolphins Twitter. When you talk about social media, sure, there's people who are employed to do the social media for the Dolphins and for around the league, and in that industry now. That's something that's creating jobs. But if the Dolphins continue to suck and they go 0-12, 0-13, 0 whatever it is, but they're really sucking, they're not making an honest effort, the front office and ownership, right? They're just not. They're building for the future, I guess. They're trying to paper over the malfeasance of management there. But as we get deeper into the season, understand that the Miami Dolphins, if you don't know, I would think you do, has an official Twitter account. And so everything that's being tweeted out, this is what we're talking about. The whole point of why I brought this up to Will Brinson is everything that they're tweeting out, they're getting destroyed on. And what I was thinking about doing during the show was I wanted to pull up the Miami Dolphins Twitter account, and I wanted to Josina Anderson, by the way, ESPN reporter, one of the best breaking news reporters, Josina Anderson. And her Twitter is Josina Anderson, Josina Anderson. She just asked, who calling Cap, right? Who's calling Colin Kaepernick? This is an NFL reporter for ESPN, very high profile. Who's calling him? Shouldn't the Jets be calling him at this point? I mean, there's no higher profile situation right now where if he's not going to get a job now, he's just not going to get a job. And you heard Will Brinson talk about the fact that Woody Johnson has this sort of indirect connection to the Trump administration. Now, listen, and I'm going to be saying this throughout. I'm not going to gratuitously talk about something that's happening politically, even if it's the shared experience that's directly impacting all of our lives, maybe we make an exception once in a while. But what I'm focused on is sports. Now, when President Trump's involved, that's part of sports. That's not only affecting a roster or a player or a team, that's affecting a betting line. That's affecting gambling, right? So to me, that's something that you're doing your job. So, so when we're talking about Trump or whatever, and Will Brinson brought up the fact that the Jets have this indirect connection to the Trump administration, you know what? I'd be willing to bet you, when you think about the lobbyists that the NFL have in Washington, they've got some of the highest priced lobbyists in DC, the NFL, right? I would venture to guess every single ownership group has some manner of connection to Trump. Whether it's a member of the ownership group has contributed to Trump's campaign, whatever it is, that's reality. Now, of course, Donald Trump came out a while ago and said, hey, the NFL is free to sign Colin Kaepernick, as if, he controlled the situation. Oh, actually, he does, come to think of it, right? He does, right? But he said, if he's good enough to play, they should sign him. Well, to me, that's being done for posterity. That's being done so he can always point to that. I think you've got a tacit situation with the owners, between the owners and Trump. I think there's a deal under the table in which Trump is going to get, this is my opinion, President Trump's going to get a piece of an NFL franchise for keeping quiet in this situation as it pertains to the NFL players who are, I might add, they're still kneeling, right? Eric Reed, still kneeling. Kenny Stills, still kneeling. What's that tell you about the networks and about their relationship to the NFL and what the networks are willing to do? These are just inanimate, documented facts. I think the underlying reason we talk about all this, and I talked about it from the outset of the show, is the NFL is not all about winning. NFL teams are not all about winning, with maybe the exception of the Patriots. Patriots clearly will do anything to win. Don't care. Doesn't matter. Antonio Brown, weirdo, bad guy. It's impossible to conclude otherwise. Is he a criminal? No. They don't care. PR doesn't matter. And when they're not held accountable, the Boston media bitches and moans about Bill Belichick being a liar all the time, every day. You can't watch or listen or read Boston media without finding out how Bill Belichick is a liar. So why even bring it up, guys? You've been doing it for 20 years. Why are you still bringing it up? What's the point? It is what it is. So we're going to be joined shortly by Cecil Hurt of the Tuscaloosa News and also Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports. That'll be in short order. Dan Wetzel will join us later in the week. Had a technical issue, but we've got plenty to talk about here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And college football, it's funny. We should have known pro football is such a hot topic, hot subject. And obviously, we've got Daniel Jones being named starting quarterback of the Giants today. That's a big story as it pertains to the changing of the guard with Eli Manning. Is that over? We've had the news about the injuries of Ben Roethlisberger and Drew Brees, catastrophic injury for the Steelers, and the Steelers pull off this big trade with Minkah Fitzpatrick going from the Dolphins, former first-round pick, to the Steelers, and they swap picks additionally. So a lot of news going on, in addition to Jalen Ramsey, who now wants to trade one of the elite cornerbacks in the NFL, Jalen Ramsey, who wants out of Jacksonville. No big surprise when you think about who's running that team. Tom Coughlin, my way or the highway, Tom Coughlin. We'll see how that works out. But Ramsey had a confrontation with Doug Marrone on Sunday, in which Ramsey put his hands on Doug Marrone, and now Jalen Ramsey wants out. And this is going to be a pivotal story. Jalen Ramsey of the Jacksonville Jaguars wants out of Jacksonville, and he's demanding a trade. Sound familiar? Of course it does, but not in the NFL. In the NBA, not in the NFL. What's going to happen here? This is a story to follow as you're judging stories that really matter in the NFL. This is a story to follow because this is going to perhaps determine a sea change in the National Football League if Jalen Ramsey gets his way. If he's traded, which it appears he's going to be traded. If he's traded, what's going to happen? You've got a precedent. Now other players who aren't happy whatever the situation may be, whether it's their deal, whether it's their money, whether it's the coaching situation, whether it's the chemistry, whether it's you're losing. Of course, that's a big part of what's happening right now with the Dolphins. Players starting to get their way. Of course, the big difference is that the players don't have guaranteed contracts nearly to the extent NBA players have. So they don't have the hammer that NBA players have. They are not partners with the owners. They just aren't. But here's a thought. If you were an NFL player today, how could you get that hammer? How could you get that guaranteed contract? I can tell you, I know the answer. The answer is you're paid throughout the regular season, 18 weeks. You get your game check if you're an NFL player. Your game checks don't come during the playoffs. They don't come throughout the year. They're not spread out. They're just the regular season. That's when you get your checks after the games. Well, what if secretly a team got together, or a group of teams got together, the players, and they decided to walk out at the end of the regular season? Think about that. Think about what that would mean. A colossal financial catastrophe for the NFL and for the networks. After, the situation we have now with the NFL and television, they're kind of the same, aren't they? But can you imagine what would happen? Can you imagine the amount of leverage that players have? Apparently, they're unaware of it, because if they were to walk out now, we all understand the financial realities of everyone's lives. And of course, you've got the financial realities of a lot of players that don't afford perhaps all players walking out. You would imagine a lot of them would cross the line. But if star players who had a lot of money already in the bank, could afford to do it, didn't cross the line, what might happen? What might happen is a reopening of the CBA. It reminds me a little bit of college football players. When you think about college football players' status, not being paid, not being compensated, not getting health care guaranteed in writing, that's the case for all college football players right now. How do they change that? You know how they change it? A union organizer from, let's say, the UAW, whatever it is, a major union, like the union that came in and began to assist Major League Baseball initially when they built the strongest union in the history of commercial spectator sports. If you had an outside union come in and organize players, let's just say at UCLA, or the student employee union at the Cal State University system level, right? The UCLA football players went to the organizers of that student employee union. It wouldn't take long to unionize. It wouldn't be difficult at all to do that. And if you unionize, you collectively bargain, you have a hammer and you get compensated. That's how it happens. And it could be easily done. How do I know it would be easily done? Because of what we saw at the University of Missouri a few years ago. You remember what happened there? There was just a tiny little threat amongst a faction of Missouri football players to walk out and not practice.
Sorry, I don't know that.
All right. I have no idea what that was. This is related to my computer, I guess, that's set up. Did you hear that, Cam, by the way? Let's see if we can't get rid of it. There we go. Hopefully that turned it off. So that was wonderful. Cortana joining us here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Coming up, we're going to be talking college football with Cecil Hurt, covers the Alabama Crimson Tide, covers the SEC, and has been visiting with Nick Saban today in his press availability. We'll get the very latest on what's going on with Alabama and the SEC, and then national college football picture with Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports. And you never know who else might drop in, right, Cortana? might drop. I don't know if you guys heard that. You probably did, right? So we were just talking about college football, something that would be easy to do. Very easy. Very, very easy would be for the players to unionize. I talked about the Missouri situation. This is how we know it could happen. The Missouri football players threatened to walk out on practice, not even a game. And the fallout from that incident got the president of the University of Missouri and the University of Missouri system fired. There was a call for his head because the powers that be in college football at the television network level, right, can't afford to allow for any sort of indicator that the players in college football have any leverage. So they would rather blow out the president of the University of Missouri system than allow for players to skip one practice. Are you kidding me? Just shows you the amount of power the players have that they don't realize that they have. And here's the thing that's really important to understand. You're sitting here right now and you might be thinking, what the hell is this guy talking about? You know, NFL players striking after 18 games. College football players unionizing. What is this guy talking about? He's just one guy. What does he know? Right? I know a lot. And I know that the reason that you don't know anything about the situation and what is possible, right, is the media that I've been a part of my whole life. That's why. The reason these guys don't do that, those football players, is not only does the sports media discourage that, well, they don't discourage it, they have no concept of it. Literally. We haven't even thought about it, right? Another example of what I'm talking about is NFC Championship game. Talked about it yesterday a little bit on the show. The pass breakup, the non-call, Rams and Saints, right? All of a sudden, we've got all of this legalized gambling. Not that that matters, but nobody says a word about a fix, right? Nobody, right? They're either, and if you bring it up, oh, they're either offended or, oh, no, that couldn't possibly happen. You know, it's not like that's a subjective thing, right? Oh, wait, it is. I'm sorry, right? Oh, of course, though, we know who these officials are and they're accountable for their jobs and their livelihood. Oh, wait, they're not accountable. Nobody's accountable, right? Nobody has any idea who the referees are, who assigns them, what happens to them. Very convenient, isn't it? Especially when you're running Fox Bet, right? Or you're airing Daily Wager on ESPN. How convenient, right? Nobody knows anything. Everything's covered up. It is covered up. The identities of the officials, no transparency, all that stuff. Nobody has any idea what's going on. What a coincidence. Now, that's why we're doing this show. I'm not going to sit here and harangue you every single day about that, but that's the reality of the situation. And what's troubling to me and what I think I'm going to play a role in, and yes, this is, folks, this is all about me. It is all, sorry, but it is. I've done it in my career and I'll continue to do it. Remind people of these things because they're important. Look, if you're wagering or you're gambling on sports, wouldn't you like to know what's really going on at the very least? I'm not saying we're going to go out and investigate this stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if people know they're accountable, people know that what they're doing is being tracked in the NFL, college football, officials, you know, gambling operations, relationships, just documenting those things, right? If that happens, it's more likely that you're not going to have game fixing going on, shaving points going on, funny business, right? Of course, there's always going to be that stuff. You never know it. Nobody talks about it. the irony is in this whole discussion is maybe, and maybe this is something that I'm wrong about, but I've done polls over the years on Twitter where I've asked, do you think this game is fixed? And I asked, I think I have to go back to the Twitter poll that I did. I asked, do you think that the game was fixed between the Rams and the Saints last year? And well over 50% of the people who responded, and I'm 4,000 to 5,000 people responded to that poll. Generally, I'll get at least 1,500 to 2,000 votes on every single poll that we do on the SportsbyBrooks Twitter, right? So we're talking about thousands of people on a consistent basis. And in the poll in which I asked, was the game fixed? It was over 50% that people suspected that it was fixed, but not a hint, not a word about that possibility in the media. And of course, I'm part of the media, but it's so absurd and ridiculous that if I was to bring this up to a young journalist, they would, what they would say to me about this situation? Where do you start? Exactly, that's the whole point. It's like trying to climb up a cliff with your bare hands. What's the first rock? You don't even have the ability to reach up and grab anything to start up on that trek up that mountain, right? And so what's funny is I'm watching the Dolphins Twitter here, and wow, this is pretty funny. You've just got to go to the Miami. If you want to be entertained today, go to the Miami Dolphins Twitter. And boy, they're almost filibustering today. I'm looking at the Dolphins Twitter right now. And so it's almost as if they're tweeting so many things out, ridiculous things that have nothing to do with the Dolphins right now, that they're filibustering all the people who are killing them. All the fans are killing people that are on Twitter. They're going into the tweets and they're replying and commenting to these tweets, and they're murdering the Dolphins. So every little thing that they do, it doesn't matter. Like there was a tweet about an hour ago, and the tweet from the official Miami Dolphins account is, "Hear from Coach Flores as the team begins prep for Dallas on the road. This is your Dolphins Daily." And it's a link to a video of Brian Flores, the coach, commenting about what's going on as they prep for Dallas on the road. And so the tweets begin. The first reply from a Twitter user is on the thread, 0-3 coming up. And another reply, I'm not going to go through all of these or too many of them. Another tweet is a reply, "They're beginning prep all right. Same one for a colonoscopy." They're prepping for a colonoscopy. Then another reply, "Pressing forward," because remember, pressing forward while moving backwards. Here's another one. "Score more points. Hell, score a point. That should probably be covered." Let's see. This comes from a WR Rob, Twitter user, in the Miami Dolphins Twitter account thread. They're talking about the host of this Dolphins Daily. They just posted, and there's a female host of it. And someone writes here, Rob Lee, about that woman. "Damn, she has the hardest job in sports, and she should be given a raise for having to say all that with a straight face. If ownership and the front office weren't the cheapest and most inept in the league." More comments. "Evaluating players should have been done before the season. Say whatever. I'm sick of this BS. Shake my head, SMH." Overheard in the locker room. Quote, "Think we can give up 60 this week? They're good." And then another one. "Your team is tanking on purpose. prepping for the laydown, right? So literally all of these comments, and there are thousands and thousands of these comments building up. They're building up on the Dolphins Twitter account. All right. For good reason, especially if you're somebody who's spending money on those tickets. Talk about a buy and hold and enduring pain, right? So we're going to get back into the Dolphins. A lot more to talk about as far as the NFL is concerned, of course, every single day here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. But coming up, we're going to talk to Cecil Hurt of the Tuscaloosa News, and then Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports, talking college football with you on the Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And Cecil, I appreciate you taking the time, man. Thanks so much.
To do it.
So let's talk about Alabama first of all, and what you saw in that South Carolina game. What were your thoughts about that game?
Well, they're still struggling in some areas. They're not struggling at quarterback. Tua had one of his better games. They have so many weapons around Tua. They have the best set of receivers. People will debate that, and they'll say, "Oh, Clemson certainly has excellent receivers, but Judy and Ruggs are guaranteed first rounders." And then you have Waddle and Devontae Smith, and then you're throwing to Najee Harris out of the backfield. So they were pretty difficult to stop on offense, but they gave up 23 points. They gave up over 400 yards, and those aren't necessarily the hallmarks of a Nick Saban team. So injuries have caught up with them a little bit. The long cycle of guys who play 3 years and leave, it's just constantly going to be young players. Doesn't mean they don't have good players. They recruit at the highest level in the country, but they have to play a lot of young players.
It's interesting. If you look online, you look at Twitter, and you follow what's going on in the media, a lot of people seem to think that South Carolina very well should have been in that game, and that it was a bungle job by Will Muschamp. Do you think? Do you subscribe to that?
They were going to have a hard time. They were going to have to come up with a way to score 45, because they were going to have a hard time stopping Tua. People say, "Oh, well, he should have asked for a replay on the goal line, whether the guy's knee was down and so forth." But they were going to have to put a lot of points on the board to actually win the game. Again, Alabama scored 45, really not pushing that hard right to the end to score. If it had taken 52, they probably could have scored again. So I don't know that certainly I was there. I don't know that I ever felt like, oh, South Carolina is about to win this game. They had a couple of tough breaks. They had a fake punt that got called back on a holding. They didn't end up with points at the end of the half that they could have had. So they could have made it more challenging, but I don't know that they were ever going to be able to score enough with Walensky, who had a nice game, but I don't know that they were ever going to get it in the end zone. They stalled out in the red zone 3 times. So it was just going to be hard for them to keep up scoring-wise. Kind of like a Big 12 game, to be perfectly honest.
Visiting with Cecil Hurt. You can find him on Twitter at Cecil Hurt, one word. He covers Alabama football and basketball since 1982 for the Tuscaloosa News, and you can find him at tidesports.com. And going back to the South Carolina game, there's been talk about the defense, and maybe South Carolina didn't take advantage of opportunities. I know I'm kind of hammering away at this, but what about that defense specifically at Alabama? And we saw what happened in the Clemson game. We really don't have a feel yet until they see some stiff competition, an opposing offense. Has Alabama done anything significantly to that defense, maybe to prevent what happened against Clemson from taking place this year?
I don't know that they've made any, philosophical changes. It's a Nick Saban defense. You just try and have better players and perform better, get a better edge rush. They didn't have enough pass rushing off the edge against Clemson, partly because they had their best edge rushers out, partly because Trevor Lawrence was excellent and want to give him credit. And they made huge plays particularly in third down situations. But both their starting inside linebackers, who would have been starters 2 weeks before the season, you would have said, well, it'll be Moses and McMillan. They're out for the year. they're injured. So they're playing 2 freshmen inside linebackers. Started 2 freshmen against South Carolina, had to make a change with Ali Cajo coming in for Christian Harris because they were getting mixed up in their assignments. They were struggling a little bit. They've got 2 freshman defensive linemen, DJ Dale and Justin Aboigbe. So that's 4 freshmen who are major contributors in your front 7. And that just, even though these are highly recruited players, it's not like Alabama doesn't have good players, but you're talking about guys with, going into the South Carolina game with 2 games of college experience. And it catches up with you. It hadn't always been. You look at Alabama in 2016, they're loaded with pros. Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Minka Fitzpatrick, so forth and so on. Not that way this year. There are some guys who'd be drafted. They've got 2 good edge rushers in Lewis and Jennings, but they're not as strong up the middle. And South Carolina exploited it. Duke exploited it to an extent. Again, they're not terrible. They're good in the red zone defensively, but it's just not certainly not a dominant defense like 2011 or 2016. And people tune into Alabama games and they have certain expectations of what they want to see because of what it's been for over the past 10 years. And this just isn't one of those defenses yet. Could it be in the future? Sure. Will it be by the time that they get to Texas A&M on the schedule, LSU on the schedule, Auburn on the schedule, possible postseason play on the schedule? Don't know. There's no way to know how quickly those freshmen will come along.
How good do you think Auburn is?
It's a big game against Texas A&M. They're really good on the defensive front. That'll keep them in every game they play. Bo Nix is a smart freshman, knows what Gus wants out of his offense. They're really they've got some other receivers, but Seth Williams is their main target. When teams really try and take him away, I'll be interested to see. They need to be a little bit better in the running game. So big game for them in College Station this weekend.
This is a really exciting year for SEC football. I think one of the reasons is LSU has established this offensive personality. I mean, what are your thoughts on those guys and what kind of problems? I mean, do you think that there's a possibility they can go and beat Alabama this year, or are they a year away?
It's possible. They got Joe Burrow at quarterback. They've got tremendous athletes around him. The game's in Tuscaloosa. But I think at the top of the SEC right now, where usually you say, well, it's Alabama and everybody else. Now you would say it's LSU, Georgia, and Alabama, and any one of them could win the league. I wouldn't be surprised at any of the 3 coming out of Atlanta as the champion because they're all really, really top-notch teams. Now, they can't all go undefeated. Only one of them can. Maybe none of them will. But they're very good teams.
What about the strength of the SEC overall? When you look at the SEC compared to other conferences, is this as strong as you can remember it, or are there other times?
It's been deeper. They are similar to other conferences. We can sit here with every conference and name. Probably the difference is the SEC has 3 teams at the top, where the Big 12 has Oklahoma and Texas. The ACC, clearly, Clemson is the only team that you'd put in that category. The Big 10, Ohio State, certainly, maybe Michigan, maybe Wisconsin. That's another very interesting game coming up. The Pac-12, Utah, maybe. If Utah doesn't run the table, I don't know where they'll be playoff-wise. But the SEC has 3 teams at the top. Now, they've got some teams, obviously. Tennessee's struggling at the bottom. Arkansas is in a rebuild at the bottom, like all leagues have. So, Tennessee loses to Georgia State. That's not a good loss. Just like Georgia Tech losing to the Citadel is not a good loss. So, it's strong at the top, but it's not as deep. There have been years where you would go 8, 9, 10 teams in the SEC and say those are really good teams out of the 14. And this year it's probably, depending on what happens with a little bit with Missouri, a little bit with Florida with a new quarterback, you probably could only say 5 or 6 teams are real, legitimate top 20 teams.
Visiting with Cecil Hurd of the Tuscaloosa News. You can find him at Tide Sports, Cecil Hurd on Twitter. And What's interesting to me about the Nick Saban situation particularly is there doesn't seem to be, it seems like we couldn't wait. There was a period of time in college football where we couldn't wait to set up these succession plans. And I'm not so sure those succession plans weren't based on some of the trustees and donors maybe wanting to nudge old-time coaches out of those programs. You think back to a Mac Brown. Maybe you think back to a Bob Stoops and that Lincoln Riley situation. That might have been that situation, and there have been other examples. But what about Nick Saban? I haven't heard anything to that extent. Does that mean we can expect him indefinitely?
Well, yeah. Again, they've made the playoffs every year that they've been playoffs. So nobody wants to really change that. Obviously.
Well, yeah.
Obviously, it's a unique situation that Dabo is an alum. But first of all, I think Dabo's happy at Clemson. Second of all, I don't think Nick is in any particular hurry to get out of coaching, and I don't know where else he would go to coach unless he just got the NFL bug again so badly that he had to do that. So it's not a daily topic here that Nick's gonna, what's the exit plan for Nick? Because right now, he's happy here. His family seems happy here. They obviously have all the resources necessary to win as much as anywhere in the country. So it's not a daily topic, Brooks.
So, I know you've covered the team for a long time. You're a great guy to talk to about this, but talk about what in the history of your tenure in covering the team, what does Nick Saban mean to that state, and what is the feel that you have there? And it's a hard question to ask, though, but does it feel different with Nick Saban than it has not just in the time that you've covered the team in your lifetime? Is this an unprecedented situation?
Well, yes and no. I covered Coach Bryant, so I've got some familiarity with that, obviously, and times were different, and you've been in the South, you've worked in the South, and you understand what I'm saying, that the 60s were a different time. And the nation is more homogenous these days.
Money.
Much more money in the sport. But, when Coach Bryant was winning national championships in 1961, in 1964, think of everything that was going on in Alabama, and Alabama was not portrayed, and probably for good reasons in many cases, wasn't portrayed in the national media in a positive way. If Birmingham, if Tuscaloosa was on the national news, you had an idea of what the situation was. It was a civil rights issue. It was church bombing. It was fire,
something negative.
So the one positive that people had was Alabama football, and the identification. And Coach Bryant had played at Alabama. He had come up not in Alabama but in Arkansas, but from literally a sharecropper background. That's what his youth was. And so the identification and the power of that identification at the time when there was no other positive reinforcement in the state, that created a culture and iconography about Coach Bryant that'll never be paralleled because times are different. Nick Saban could win every single game, and it wouldn't be, the times aren't the same. But there is certainly a great respect for Nick Saban, even though he doesn't have the Alabama background, but he's won at an unprecedented level. Not even Bear Bryant won 5 national championships in 10 years.
When you think about the number of jobs, let's just say, and I look at things weird, but the number of jobs that Nick Saban has created for that economy, that's what I think about. It's like, and I know the state to a certain extent has always mobilized itself to an extent for Alabama and Auburn, some of the other schools, but in particular, this guy is an industry unto itself that not just the state of Alabama. I don't think I've ever seen anybody have this kind of financial impact on a region. Or am I wrong? Am I overstating it?
You're not. It's some of it's hard to quantify, but you just look at the enrollment at Alabama, and obviously football and successful football is part of the recruiting tool that they use. It's about an education, but it's also about a social life. And it's a huge part of the social life. And the enrollment is up probably 15,000 students from the time Nick Saban took over. So
real estate. I mean, real estate prices.
You should see Tuscaloosa. It's unbelievable how much development there is.
Now, if you didn't have a winning team over this period of time, would that all be different? Let's just say real estate. We know enrollment would be. What would you think? Real estate would not be growing to the extent that it is?
Again, a lot of factors go into that. The university had wanted to expand anyway, but sure, you attract a lot of out-of-state students, which is what they've done. You attract affluent students. So I think it's certainly tied into the real estate boom and the fact that the economy in Tuscaloosa has been good. The national economy's been good. I don't question that, but it is a big part of it, just on that one level, whether it's real estate, whether it's tourism, whether it's a variety of side industries and so forth. That anytime you have a tremendous success and people identify an area with that tremendous success, it's going to be attractive to investment. And that's football does not make the world go round, but it does make a nice recruiting tool.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Cecil. Hopefully we can do this again, man. I really appreciate you dropping in. That's great.
Thanks.
That's Cecil Hurt of the Tuscaloosa News, Tidesports.com. Nice enough to join us and talk SEC, Alabama football, and go in depth, a little deep dive on how Alabama football, Nick Saban, has impacted the state. And we're going to be talking more about Nick Saban, more about Dabo Swinney, in particular, a potential succession plan. I actually want to bring it up to Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports coming up, as he will be on the show. Hopefully, we'll get an opportunity to talk to him here shortly here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Of course, Dennis is a national writer for CBS, longtime guy for CBS, Kansas Cityan, I might add. Lives in what once upon a time is where I used to live, Overland Park, Kansas. So, and I want to talk a little bit about the unbelievable resurgence of the state of Kansas and college football. Want to get into the Reggie Bush situation. And we're going to talk to Arash Markazi of the Los Angeles Times later on this week about that. Reggie Bush going back and covering USC football on behalf of Fox at the Coliseum. He's going to be there for the USC football game coming up. That's a night game against Utah. And you can bet we're going to have Ryan Abraham of USCfootball.com. We're broadcasting from his studios right now here in Redondo Beach in Los Angeles. You see the Coliseum behind me, right? Well, we're actually in Redondo. But so we're going to be discussing college football with Dennis. And so far, we've already talked to Will Brinson, talked some NFL. We've talked to Cecil Hurt down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, talking about Alabama, LSU. I like LSU a lot in the West, in the SEC. I'm going to be throwing out my picks, what I think is going to happen in the future, because I think we're going to see a changing of the guard in college football coming out of the SEC. This is going to be the big year for LSU to finally emerge from the shadow of Nick Saban. Of course, once upon a time, Nick Saban coached at LSU, won a national title there. So you can imagine the emotions churning through the stomachs and heads and minds of LSU fans whenever LSU plays Alabama. LSU is at Alabama this year. And then, of course, you've got to deal with Georgia on the other side of the division, assuming that Georgia doesn't stumble. The marquee game this Saturday in college football is going to be Notre Dame against Georgia, with the Fighting Irish traveling down to the state of Georgia, coming off that incredible game last year up in South Bend against the Georgia Bulldogs. And so you've got Georgia, you've got LSU, you've got Alabama. Doesn't look like any other team is going to emerge Probably not Auburn. I can't see it. Texas A&M, we saw what happened to them against Clemson a couple of weeks ago. Not very impressive. Not as impressive as I thought, as I told you that Texas A&M would be. I was dead flat wrong. So, but as the SEC goes, so goes college football. You got Clemson right now. That's an aberration, if you will. But when it comes to Alabama football, and he mentioned Dabo Swinney, Cecil Hurd of the Tuscaloosa News, covering the team since 1982, when I asked him about a potential succession plan for Alabama football and Nick Saban, what happened? What did Cecil say? He brought up the name, unprompted, Dabo Swinney. Now, why would he bring that name up? Well, Dabo Swinney, coach of Clemson, went to the University of Alabama, was a walk-on player. He's from the state, earned eventually a starting role on what turned out to be the last national champion Alabama team until Nick Saban arrived for his tenure with the school. So there was a long dry period from the time Alabama had won its last national title to when Nick Saban pulled off his first in a string of national titles at Alabama. And it just so happens that Dabo Swinney was on that last national championship team coached by Gene Stallings. And he was a walk-on who earned a scholarship, earned a starting spot, then goes on, Swinney, to be an assistant coach for Alabama for several years before that entire staff was let go. And Swinney ended up as a salesman in the state of Alabama. He was out of football before he was invited by Tommy Bowden, who was the head coach at Clemson at the time and had been an assistant coach on the staff at Alabama with Dabo Swinney. Tommy Bowden invites Dabo Swinney to come to Clemson to be an assistant coach. Eventually, Tommy Bowden gets blown out, and Dabo Swinney is pegged as the lame duck interim coach. But for some reason, some way, somehow, Dabo Swinney ends up keeping that job, right? He's able to work through a losing season, and then he becomes the permanent head coach. How many times have we seen that? A bystander, if you will, on the coaching staff. But that's what happened with Dabo Swinney, and the rest is history. Now, the speculation is, of course, that when Nick Saban steps down eventually, Dabo Swinney is going to be the man. And let me tell you, people that are debunking that, people that are claiming that's not going to happen, in my honest opinion, it's going to happen. And the reason I say that is not pure speculation, but what Dabo Swinney has said and what he's not said on the subject, on the topic. Not so much of him going back to Alabama, but if he were to leave Clemson, it's a given. You would think that he would go to Alabama. I mean, that would be the pretense for him to leave. And so if Nick Saban decides he's going to retire, or maybe Alabama football falls off a cliff, who knows? You just never know. Nick Saban, as the head coach at the University of Alabama, lost to Louisiana Monroe. I'm not saying it's going to happen anytime soon or ever again. It's always possible. But if and when Nick Saban leaves in the next few years, Dabo Swinney is going to be the coach of Alabama. And the reason I say that, along with the background that I just laid out for you, is Dabo Swinney has been on radio shows, talk shows. He was on a podcast with Kirk Herbstreit last year. And Herbstreit, who has twin sons playing football right now for Clemson, asked Dabo Swinney about the possibility of him leaving. And in the way that Kirk framed the question, it was a leading question where he was indicating, you would never leave, right, Dabo? And then Dabo responded by saying on this ESPN podcast with Kirk Herbstreit, well, you just never know. Doesn't matter, what is going on right now. Things can change. And we might in the future not have a president or an athletic director who is as favorable as the ones we have now. That's what Dabo Swinney said. He said, and this was kind of an unfortunate comparison. I don't know why he would draw this comparison, but he said they fired Joe Paterno. They could fire anybody. I think, he could have come up with some better examples of coaches that had been around a long time who were let go. Paterno was let go purely because of the Sandusky incident. Although you could certainly make a case that he should have been fired previously several times because Penn State wasn't a very good football team. But because he raised so much money over the years, he was the school, PSU, Paterno State. Right. And that's why his name's still on the library at Penn State. Regardless, Dabo certainly left the door open. And by the way, Cam, if we don't have any luck with Dennis Dodd here, let's go ahead and try to reschedule with him if he was not able to get on by now, because we're not going to have more than 5 minutes with him, it appears. And I don't want to keep him. So I know we're efforting. Cam Smith, our producer in Boston, as we talk college football, talking about Dabo Swinney. You heard Cecil Hurt invoke it, and he talked about it. He discussed it a little bit. Boy, it's funny, though, when we talk to Cecil, great guy, and he's another great guy on Twitter. Really funny, wry humor, something that you discover only through Twitter. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful tool. It's unfortunate that it gets demonized because it's not the software, it's the people that are behind it that make it happen. That if something is a positive or a negative, it had nothing to do with software. Just like all social media, it's people. But he was great. Really, really enjoyed him coming on. And he just sent out a nice tweet about our show, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. And if you're an Alabama fan, you're an LSU fan, you're a Georgia fan. I'm a Georgia fan. I went to the University of Georgia. I was a walk-on place kicker at the University of Georgia, in case you don't know. But we're going to be talking a lot about college football. Particularly, I want to do it here on Fancred because this is a place where I want to bring people onto the fan line. We haven't done any of that yet. We're going to. If you think we're not, you're wrong, because we're going to be covering college football stories like what I just talked about. How many times have you heard that story I just told you about Dabo Swinney? You haven't heard it. You haven't. You're talking about Saban and Swinney, Nick and Dabo. All right. That's as big as it gets in college football. As big as it gets. And right now, we're in kind of a static period. So when it comes to college football, and, I think everybody, when I say static, everything is kind of bumping along, seemingly. There's no controversy. And, of course, one of the reasons why is we have taken out the NCAA violations. We've taken out ineligibility of athletes. We're in a post-NCAA phase. So right now, everything is seemingly fine. And, of course, that's the way the networks want it. That's the way they like it. And that's why we don't get the media scandals, because make no mistake, when it comes to NCAA violations, schools getting placed on probation, which never happens anymore. Well, that's a function of the media. People like me, right, not holding the NCAA, more specifically the schools. It's not the NCAA. It's the schools accountable. I did a lot of documenting NCAA violations, smoking guns, you name it, video, audio, photographs, documents. I've done it a lot. And a lot of people who used to be in that business who are still in the media don't do it anymore. And if you think that I'm dormant, nothing's going to happen. The people down in Hawaii think that about the volcanoes, right? We'll see what happens. You just never know what's going to happen with Sports by Brooks. You just never know. Just when you think. And just when you think we cover a certain sport, we cover a certain angle, we'll see what happens, right? We'll see. right now, I think we're going to get a lot of people from college football coming on the show, hopefully. And hopefully we'll get Dennis on. We'll get Dan on. We tried to link them up with the technology today, and unfortunately it didn't happen, but we'll effort on that in the future. It's all good. Got a chance to talk to you guys a little bit more today and talk to you about the landscape of college football, what's happening in Alabama, at Clemson. Haven't gotten into Georgia yet. That Georgia-Notre Dame game, we're going to break that down, talk about it, because it's a huge game for Notre Dame. Notre Dame has to win that game if they hope to make it to the college football playoff. They've got no chance if they don't win that game. So Georgia being in the SEC East, right, they theoretically could lose that game, still have a shot at the college football playoff because you've got Alabama and you've got LSU in the West, and those teams are going to be extremely, extremely highly ranked the entire year, right? So that's going to do it for today on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. As we look to the rest of the week, today we were joined by Will Brinson of CBS Sports, senior NFL writer. We talked to a longtime Alabama beat reporter for football and basketball at the Tuscaloosa News, Cecil Hurt. Coming up later in the week, we're going to be visiting with some folks that are in the college football world up in the Big Ten, in the state of Ohio. Want to talk to them. Want to talk to some folks up in the Detroit area because I want to get a read on Michigan. I want to get a read on Ohio State. People aren't talking about that. We haven't gotten into the meat of the schedule. But even once you get into the meat of the schedule in the Big Ten, it's hard to tell because the competition is so terrible. So we're going to be fanning out in one of the big stories going on right now. And we're going to talk to Doug Lee Maurice about it later in the week from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He did a big story on Urban Meyer about 5 days ago. And up until that story, we've talked about Urban Meyer and USC. Of course we have, because that's where I thought he was going. That's where everybody thought he was going. It appeared early on in the football season that maybe Urban was backing off on that because he was so into doing the college football for Fox, right? But he's going to be at the Coliseum this Saturday for that Utah-USC game, huge game in the Pac-12. And in talking to Doug Lee Maurice, who we're going to grab a hold of and get on the show, hopefully tomorrow, talk to him about his visit with his one-on-one with Urban. It's clear to me that Urban Meyer wants to come back. And I'm telling you right now, what's today's date? Mark it down on your calendar. What's today's date? September 17th. I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you that Urban Meyer is going to coach again, and he's going to coach at USC. And the stars are aligning. It's a phenomenal situation for him. It's a match made in heaven when you look at USC. The nature of the culture there, the corruption, the win at all costs, right? Perfect match. Urban's out here making millions of dollars, getting paid by Fox, getting to know the program. He's basically in a holding pattern above the Coliseum, but now he's actually in the Coliseum. So I'm telling you right now, September 17th, 2019, we're also going to talk to all of our USC guys right out here in Los Angeles, because Urban Meyer, let me just tell you, we talked about Dabo to Alabama. Urban Meyer going to USC is going to change the face of college football. It'll change it in much the way it changed Ohio State, now perennial dominant program, right? He changed Ohio State. He's going to change the Pac-12 and USC in exactly the same way, but it could be a bigger impact for the Pac-12 because the Pac-12 needs money. They need a TV contract, right? They need a network that makes money, that gets cleared. And if he can bring back USC, I mean, if you're a college football fan, fine if you're a pro fan, that's fine. Rams fan, Chargers fan, Chiefs fan, doesn't matter, right? Patriots fan, right? If Urban Meyer can do for USC what he did at Ohio State and what he did at Florida, that will knock a lot of this NFL stuff that we see right now, and it'll knock it right off the front page. Right off the front page. Because you're not only going to have a great team with a group of fans that will go crazy, right? You've got the second biggest media market in the country. I was here for Leinart. I was here for Reggie Bush. I lived it. I covered it. I was actually on the broadcast for USC football. I was the guy who did the pre and post game, and I would take calls from USC fans. I lived the Pete Carroll era. And there are people in this town right now who don't even know the Chargers are here. But if you bring up Matt Leinart or Pete Carroll or Reggie Bush, they know who those guys are. I was actually with a group of people over the weekend, and a lady who doesn't know anything about football. We had the college football pregame show on from Fox, right? And this woman pointed at Matt Leinart and said, I know that guy. Who is that guy? Right? Of course you do. Because people don't recognize, if you were here in LA and how big it was around the country. I was at the Rose Bowl for the Vince Young late touchdown to beat USC and end that era of Pete Carroll and that dynasty at USC. So if Urban Meyer comes to USC, guaranteed they're going to have that kind of dominant presence. And so we're going to be talking about that compelling story later on in the week. I thank you very much for joining us. For our producer, Cam Smith in Boston, I'm Brooks Melchior, and this has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.